You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and some friends. For 14 years and 1,400 episodes, we've been doing this show. There's 2 to 3 shows a day, so please refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. YouTube.com/Chris Voss, Goodreads.com/Chris Voss, and LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. And check us out over there, TikTok. We're trying to be cool over there, and it's not working because we're old. Anyway, guys, we have an amazing U.S. Navy captain on the show with us today, and he's going to be telling you his amazing story, what he's written in his book about leadership, life, loyalty, from a Maverick Navy captain. And a little bit of backstory on this. You've likely heard of this gentleman. He was in the news for a little bit, and he's probably been in the news probably all of his life, but he was in the news kind of bigly, as they say. I don't know. Who says bigly? But there was like this little thing that happened around 2020, and it was like a what do they call that thing? Oh, a pandemic. You may have seen it come down the pike there, as it were. And there were some people getting this flu called the it's called the COVID. Yeah, you may have heard of that. It's kind of funny. I go to the store now, no one walks around masked. Anyway, we have Captain Brett Crozier on the show with us today. He is the author of the newest book that's coming out, Surf When You Can, which always reminds me of Apocalypse Now, that scene with Robert Duvall. And it comes out June 13th. 2023. Surf When You Can, Lessons in Life, Loyalty, and Leadership from a Maverick Navy captain. Brett Crozier joins us on the show today. And he grew up in California. Of course, it's a beautiful place to grow up with his son there. He graduated from the United States Navy. I try to say Navy for naval. So there you go. I need to watch my naval more often. The United States Naval Academy. And he embarked on a 30-year career in the Navy, flying dozens of combat missions over Iraq and leading at the highest levels of operational command. He served as the commanding officer of a combat FA-18 Strike Fighter Squadron, the world's largest and most advanced communications ship, and ultimately the USS Theodore Roosevelt before retiring from the Navy in 2022. This is his first book, and welcome to the show, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks. Thanks for the exciting intro and quick bio there.
Well, you've led an exciting life, so you've got that going on.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean that I really enjoyed all my time in the Navy and all the exciting things I got to do. I don't think I really had to grow up until I retired, as my wife said. And even now I'm trying to resist that urge to grow up and not do exciting things anymore.
Wives like that. You need to grow up, and you get a lot of that. But no, I mean, being a commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, they don't let anybody drive those things. Like, I've been applying, but they're just like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can go to Indeed and apply. I think there's some websites.
Oh, can you? Can you?
Yeah.
Do they have like volunteer commander for a day where I could just kind of go on there and be like, hey, let's put this thing up the thing. So give us a .com, sir, if you would, of where you want people to find out more about you in the internet.
Sure. If you go to surfwhenyoucan.com, you'll see links to the book and kind of the background, some pictures and videos. And one thing I also encourage people, if they go to surfwhenyoucan.com, is I list a couple nonprofits that I'm associated with. One that I work at full-time right now, taking care of homeless veterans, but others that are important. And I think it's always good to recognize folks out there that are serving in a different way than the military, and I think helps out both your local and national community. But surfwhenyoucan.com.
There you go. It just brings back that Robert Duvall thing. I should have brought a soundboard of that. I don't know if I can legally do it without paying some money. But I should have brought a soundboard of Charlie, you don't surf. I can't do Robert Duvall, clearly. So what motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, so after I mean, after 30 years, doing something, in my case, the Navy. I mean, I graduated high school when I was 18, went to the Naval Academy, served 30 years. That's kind of what I knew. And there's moments then to reflect on what you did. But first and foremost, I think I wrote the book to really thank all the men and women I served with over the years, because there's a lot of great relationships. You serve with incredible people from all over the country, all over the world in some cases. I've made some great relationships. I just felt like if I wanted to thank one person for my time, or those, one thing, would be all the people I served with, because they made an incredible experience, and I certainly learned more from them than they probably learned from me. I also thought I learned a lot of cool stuff along the way, just because I had a varied background, from flying helicopters to fighters to driving ships, to the whole pandemic thing. And it allowed me to kind of think through some thoughts on what I think is important about leadership. And I wanted to share those to a broad audience outside the military as well. And, I certainly tell my kids and family see stories, but they pretty much get tired after about 5 minutes of those kind of stories. So I figured I needed to expand my audience. So I wanted to write, second reason to write and share those stories. And then I think third, for those that know about the COVID situation, the TR, I wanted to kind of dispel this myth that I was bitter or angry. I enjoyed my time in the military every single day. There were hard days, don't get me wrong, but I learned from those hard days as well. And I couldn't have been, more honored to serve for the full 30 years. And even after the TR, and after I left the ship, after the COVID pandemic struck our ship, I served for another 2 years. I continued to fly fighters, and I felt like the Navy really took good care of me, particularly naval aviation. And I say that with knowing that for me, it's a family business. My oldest son served as an air crewman. My middle son's in Pensacola in flight school. And, my wife is, the daughter of a Navy captain. So it's a family business for us. And I stayed as long, I stayed to the end of the 30 years and was glad I did. And I want people to know that, despite everything that happened and people followed in the news or not, I was still happy to be in the Navy, and I was excited they took good care of us, and they really did up until the end. So
there you go. Well, let's lead off on that. What happened during this COVID time? Give us a recap on what what happened. There was something about some president guy who thought he was president for 4 years or something. And doing jokes.
So we were like the rest of the world. We being the Navy was trying to figure out how to deal with COVID and how it was spreading and where it was spreading and the risks it presented to the various demographics. And we were at sea on deployment. We were operating in the South China Sea, near the Philippines, near Guam, near Vietnam. And at some point on that deployment, we picked up COVID. We had a couple of sailors that tested positive for COVID. And if you can imagine the environment on an aircraft carrier, for those that have never been, it's like high school, or it's like college dorms, but packed in even more. So in some cases you have 200 sailors in a single room,
wow.
three high and 6 feet apart. So it's not a great environment to have a pandemic that spreads as it did, as we know it did. And so we were doing all we could to try to mitigate the risk to the sailors and watching the numbers grow exponentially. We had a complete medical team on board. We had an epidemiology team on board. So we were able to really track it scientifically as well. And the Navy was also trying to figure out what steps they could take at the higher levels. So at the end of the day, I was frustrated because we weren't probably getting the response we wanted. And I knew everybody wanted what was best for the sailors, but I also knew nobody wanted it as much as I did. As the captain of the ship, you were ultimately accountable for what happens on the ship. And I wanted to take care of what I knew was my number one priority as a leader, which was the sailors that worked for me. So I wrote an email that basically addressed those concerns and tried to ask for help, and then we got some help. It also got out to the public at large, and nothing in it was unclassified, but it just created a little bit of a political dynamic. And when I sent the letter asking for help, I knew that there was risk to my career. I knew I was rocking the boat, as we say, but at that point it didn't matter. The priority was pretty clear for me. And then politically, obviously that caused some consternation as you go up the chain of command all the way up to the executive level. And eventually the decision was made to relieve me of command. So I left the ship and shortly thereafter, and there was some discussion about putting me back on the ship, but then eventually they came back and said it didn't make sense to put you back on the ship. And so I served for another 2 years and then retired just last year.
There you go. And the viral moment was watching you leave your command of the ship and your crew standing up and applauding you as you left. I mean, what an
Yeah.
epic moment for a leader.
Yeah, definitely unexpected. That was the end of the day of me packing and getting ready to depart the ship, and I think it was their way of thanking me for basically sticking my neck out on their behalf. And I think it was also their way of saying, Captain, we got this. There's still a fight ahead. They were still going to have to fight through and figure out how to deal with this. But I think in some ways were saying, Captain, we got it. You trained us well. We're going to continue the fight, and we thank you for your sacrifice.
There you go.
It was a good moment.
And I mean, the book you've written details about loyalty, leadership, and life in your book. I briefly learned a lot about the military's leadership sort of stuff. We've had a few people from West Point on leadership and other great military folks on. And our military has a way of teaching leadership and all the different things. I'm trying to think of the Army's be no do. Is it be no do? No. But the aspect of what our military teaches when it comes to the quality of leadership and the way it builds leaders like yourself over tens of years, decades, really speaks to the greatness of what we do as a country. I mean, you can see the joke that I forget the gentleman's name, but he recently said that Russia, when you thought Russia had the second best military in the world, and now we found that the second best military in the Ukraine. I thought that was a punch in the gut, but and appropriately so. But we built a great leadership thing, and so there you are. You're on a ship. You've got this is a big deal. All the ships, even that start with the cruise ships, but any of these ships that are out there, once this little plague was going on, and for those listening to this years from now, there was no vaccine back then. In fact, we didn't even really understand it much. But for our enemies to know that, hey, there's a ship out there that could be, that could have problems, or multiple ships where we can't defend or protect or be aggressive on what we need to do and hold the line. That's a very dangerous position for the security of America and our allies.
Yeah, I think, and I try to be clear too when I asked for assistance, was that let's make no mistake. I mean, that if called upon, we would man the ship and we would get to sea and we would fight and defeat our enemies. I had no doubt about that. And and the question is, what point? This now comes down to operational risk management and how you make that decision, what type of decision you make based on whether you're at peace or you're at war. And everyone in the military knows when you sign up and the day you step foot in boot camp or academy or commissioning source, the potential to go to war is there. That's, you shouldn't think that that's not the case. And when you're in war, your risk calculus, your risk decisions are much different than they are when you're at peace. And I think that's important. We take a lot of steps. We do a lot of things all the time to mitigate risk, from silly things like, you have to wear a reflective belt if you're going to run anytime, that's, within an hour of sunrise or sunset, or if you're going to step on a ladder that's more than 3 feet high, you better have a helmet on. And so those are risk decisions we make because we want to mitigate that. So when we were looking at COVID, I think, we had to address it appropriately. And we had to acknowledge that there was some public information getting out there. When a carrier pulls into port, it's not a secret to anybody, right? There's not a James Bond underground location you pull in.
They're a little big, those ships.
They're pretty big. Yeah. And every sailor has a cell phone. So it's not like, you can't, and so one of the things we were dealing with was information that was getting out from every sailor that was on the deck, flight deck, or hangar bay, calling home, texting home, because we were pier side and cell coverage. And so in that regards, we were trying to manage the information to make sure it was understood, the risk, how we wanted to handle it. And so I don't think there was undue risk to our security as we talk about, because again, it would, we would have clearly just manned up and gone to sea and fought and defeated, to be honest, any enemy that would try to take advantage of those moments.
There you go. So, this whole thing gets political, and those people, we have people still watching our videos from 14 years ago. The thing that people need to remember about this is that there was a bit of squashing of information and trying to spin stuff. At one point, some idiot was telling somebody they should use bleach. to squash the thing. And there was some horse tranquilizer stuff, I think, too. There was a lot of misinformation going on, and it seemed like there was a lot of containment. I think that's been well documented in a lot of the Washington Post people we've had on. And denial, I think, is the word I was looking for, too. And so a lot of this was going on. So you coming out and writing this letter as a leader saying, I care about my people, I have responsibility to them, we need some more help here. This kind of shook some of those people that were trying to create some denial or kind of tamp down on how bad this situation really was. Is that a good assessment?
Yeah, and there's obviously complex decisions being made, and there's pressures at the executive level that I can only imagine. But when you try to limit information and try to control information, what you do is you put barriers in place. And if whether you're running a country or running a nonprofit or a corporate, kind of level, if you're squashing information or you're putting up barriers, that means you're not, as a leader, going to get the truth. You're not going to be able to make the right decisions, and you're going to make these barriers such that you want people to bring you information, right? So good companies, in my opinion, not only encourage, but they expect you to bring truth and information to decision-making processes. Bad organizations tend to try to squash it. They try to limit it. And in the end, the question is, how can you make a good decision if you don't have all the information? And I think that's kind of where we found ourselves, is that there was a lot of effort to control information, squash information, spin it as it were. And that was going to potentially lead to some catastrophic decisions. And that was our biggest worry on the ship, was that kind of hesitancy to look at the truth might mean that we're not going to get the help we needed. In that case, that would put undue risk to the crew that I was responsible for.
And as a leader, you're responsible for the lives of your people. You care about your people. Yeah. This thing was killing people. There's still people going through long COVID. What is it like to have the president of the United States suddenly take a bend on you and decide he doesn't like you asking for help to save the people in your command?
Well, I mean, I guess everybody's entitled to their opinion.
I love your perspective.
I took, what I really liked was he made there were some at the executive level made some comments about me writing as if I was Hemingway. And I just hope that my high school English teacher heard that the president of the United States compared my writing, because I think I deserve a higher grade on that paper I turned in as a senior.
There you go. Well, you have to remember, I think someone says he reads at a 4th grade level, if he can read at all. But enough of that. So I'm going to have people write me and hate me. But they're like, why are you throwing shade at, anyway, enough jokes aside about that. So yeah, you mentioned something I thought was interesting, that you came away from that without being resentful, without having issues with it. I would be a little pissed off. Like, how do you manage that? How do you square that? And how do you resolve that in your mind as to what took place and relieving you of your command and the people you care for?
Well, I knew when I sent the email, and again, it wasn't in a vacuum, and I sent it, after a lot of conversations and analysis with the medical team and the folks on board. But when I sent the email, I knew that was one of the risks. So in the end, I don't think I was surprised by the outcome. It wasn't the outcome I wanted personally, but it got us the outcome we wanted, which was the assistance for the sailors that we were trying to get in proper quarters to take care of them so that we could reduce the spread. So in that regard, I guess, it was, of the things that could happen, it was one of the things I knew could probably happen. So in that way I was prepared for it. But I also kind of believe that, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react, kind of that stoic wisdom. I'm a big believer in that. And I think at the end of the day, there was nothing to be gained by me reacting. It wasn't going to change the situation. And I've been in enough life or death situations in combat and other places where, you learn how to kind of keep your emotions in check and try to perform to your utmost level. This was just an extension of it. It wasn't a life or death situation for me. It had been to the crew, but we had started to get the help we needed. So now we're just talking professionally. My career changed a little bit, and my current job changed as I left the ship. So, and it was a great job. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was the best job I've had in my life and probably ever will have. I got to fly a helicopter one day, go launch off my own ship, to fly a Super Hornet fighter the next day, go down and help, watch them start up the reactor the next day. There's so many things that I could go around kind of in my leadership style. And then I could be on the bridge, helping drive the ship through the South China Sea with Chinese ships, a mile away. So it was exciting. It was fun. You had a lot of influence. It's a $10 billion aircraft carrier with a lot of responsibility. I loved it. And so if anything, I was disappointed only knowing that, the best job I'd had, the job I loved, was no more. But in the day, it was going to end at some point, and I knew that if it had to end for any reason shortly, then it would be doing it for the right reason, which is why in the end I think I felt okay with it. And
there you go. And I think still the Navy probably reacted and maybe gave you guys what you needed.
Yeah, I definitely think it broke down some barriers. There was a lot of discussions about various options, but the one that we were recommending as the only viable option is certainly the path that we took. And so we got the help we needed. But so there's a lesson about communication there and truth to power and the importance of speaking up, I think, when things are not going as you'd like, and accepting that, they might shoot the messenger, but oh well, at least you're getting the right decision to the right people that are having to make some of these big decisions. And that decision at the time was well beyond my capability. It involved political levels of government that I obviously was not part of. So.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO. And be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show. But I think this speaks again to leadership and the quality of people that our military teaches and brings up. Being able to take one for the team. I was just what was I listening to earlier? I was listening to some different audiobooks, but being able to risk yourself over the people that you're leading and stuff. There's something about that, and there's a benevolence to it. There's probably some other better words I can think of, but it's something that people have to look at as a leader. You have to be more concerned about other people than yourself. It's not all about me sort of position, or at least it shouldn't be. And you mentioned stoicism. One of the things I read every morning is Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. In fact, it's sitting right off the screen so that I see it every day when I'm looking at the screen. And some of these Stoic principles are just so important, especially probably from a military aspect of dealing with, when you're in these theaters that are active, you're in war, you're in danger, that you just don't go running off emotionally like I would. I just run off screaming pretty much most of the time. So you entitled the book "Surf When You Can." What does that mean? What's the thing behind that?
Well, I do love to surf. So in fairness to that, I try to surf as much as I can. And for various reasons. One, I think my love of surfing or anything activity wise outdoors is my way to have a good life work balance. And I think any leader needs to have some kind of balance in their life for many reasons. One, I think you're healthier when you do. And if you're healthier, you just work better and you can work, that's, so we I think we all know now, if the healthier you are, the better you're going to be able to work and lead and make decisions.
Definitely.
But I also think, I was going to say, it's also because you also need time to think. So kind of go back to the discussion about, Stoic wisdom. These are some great philosophers that took the time to think and write down. And oftentimes as leaders nowadays, we're so overwhelmed with texts and tweets and phone calls and emails. And I think it's very easy to get focused on these, what we call the tactical level in the military. And a true leader should be taking a step back and looking strategically on the organization. Where do they need to go? What big decisions need to be made from a revenue generation standpoint? How do you take care of your employees or your sailors? And that takes time to think. Those aren't things you can think of in between emails or between, watching stuff on your phone. So surfing for me is not only a way to have a good life work balance, but it's a way for me to think and step away from it all. Because if you're caught with a phone on the lineup out on the surfboard, you're probably going to be shunned. So you generally don't have anything out there to communicate other than yelling at the guy next to you and hanging out on the surf. So that's why I chose the title of the book and why it's important. And now I tried throughout my career to find that balance, and I still today continue to try to work on that.
Yeah, it's a little hard to surf TikTok when you're like on the board going back and forth and dodging the sharks. So, what made you attracted to the water? What made you attracted to get in the Navy? Tell us a little bit about your your origin story.
Origin
And
story.
I imagine this is kind of a memoir, right, for people?
Yeah, I think I try to tell a story of my career really through the people I met and the people I learned from, and I throw sea stories in from combat and peacetime and sometimes staff work, and I think if there's one way to say it, it's a story, it's a memoir, but it's really not like, I don't talk about me growing up directly. I talk about what I learned along the way through different stories. So it's what I really want to do is introduce the reader to a bunch of people I met throughout my career, and then through that kind of tell the lessons I learned. And in some cases, I'm relating a story that took place when I was playing baseball as a young kid, and other times it's someone I met when I was more senior and told me the importance of like teamwork in a way that that resonated with me. But my origin story, as it were, my dad was in the Air Force, so that clearly meant I was going to go a different direction, just because I wanted to be the rebel that I was. But he only did a few years, but it was enough to plant the seed, because I got to be around airplanes at a very young age, and fell in love with aviation. And remember, as a young kid, buying a book on military jets. So fast forward, that was my goal as a young kid, is to fly airplanes. The faster, the louder, the better, which generally meant the military. So I was leaning towards the Air Force, and then a small movie came out in 1986 that some people remember. But suddenly I learned by watching Top Gun when I was 16, and also learning to drive at the same time, that lo and behold, the Navy actually does some pretty cool things in aviation. So that sent me towards the Naval Academy and on a path in aviation. And I was the kid when I was, if you had sent me to flight school when I was 16, I would have skipped college and gone right to flight school. That's all I wanted. And luckily I had smarter parents than I, and made sure I got the college degree that was required, and was able to get to the Naval Academy and loved it. And so that's why I joined. But I told people I didn't stay for flying. As much as I love flying, and I flew helicopters and fighters, and I stayed for the people. I stayed for the people I met and the people I got to serve with. And it's an incredible group of selfless people from all over the country, in some cases the world, that serve in our military. And that was what I enjoyed the most, was meeting them, learning from them. But it was cool to go jump in a jet occasionally and take off from a carrier or land on the back of a carrier. So those were exciting moments that kept me going as well.
Yeah, you've got the multifaceted, you got the boats, and you got the planes, and you got all the gear, and you can do everything. In fact, I think we have Hazard Lee's on the show with us, I think today or tomorrow. U.S. Air Force combat pilot and instructor. His book, The Art of Clear Thinking. And we'll have yours between the thing here in the final show. But I mean, what an extraordinary thing. But the leadership principles that they teach in our military are just extraordinary. And I didn't really understand. I mean, I knew they're a big deal, but watching the military structure of the Russians and like their whole weird system of hierarchy, and then seeing it just fail miserably, is really been interesting to see how that plays out, and how somehow we've gotten it right.
Yeah, and I think if you study in depth on the differences between the two, we really believe in delegation, right? I mean, Colin Powell said you delegate till you're uncomfortable, and then you delegate some more. And I think what he meant is, if you train folks well and you empower them, then you let them go off and make the decisions they need to in those environments. As an aviator at a young rank, I would sign for an airplane, and I would be entrusted to take off and fly well beyond the range of the carrier, and I'd have live ordnance on the jet, and I would be making life or death decisions at times, and that at a very young age. And I think what you find in many other services, or like the Russians as an example, they don't train the same way, so they're much more controlled and much more hierarchical, and you don't do anything unless you get permission, and that really slows down certainly a military, particularly in combat, if you're waiting for approval to do anything. And if you're in the corporate world, I'd argue the same thing, and I see it in the nonprofit world. If people are waiting for permission all the time, well, it just slows down. It's just mucking up the wheels, and that's not how you want an organization to run if you're trying to be nimble and make good, quick decisions so you can move forward. So I think there's a balance there, and I think you're right to your earlier point. The military, in the U.S. military, trains people very well, both tactically and technically, as required, but also from a leadership standpoint. From the moment I entered the Naval Academy to the day I left, there's always discussions about leadership, and people tend to think the military is all about discipline and and how early can you get up? How much do you need to work out? How long can you go without sleep? That's an element, and that's an important element in any military organization. But the U.S. military also trains well to understand the importance of servant leadership, and that comes down to taking care of your people. And that's what I think I want to make sure people understand is, and that's kind of what I write about in the book, is there's this softer side of leadership that is as essential as being about discipline and hard work and and holding people accountable. You have to know how to communicate. You have to understand culture. You have to understand teamwork and the strength of that in any organization. So as a leader, if you're only focused on the hard right side of discipline and go without sleep, you're probably not doing as well as you can. And the organization certainly is not. But I think as leaders, no matter what your line of work, those softer skills of knowing how to relate, how to communicate, how to build teamwork is really essential to your success. And I see that now in the nonprofit world. I think it's even in the nonprofit world that people join not to get rich, but for some higher kind of cause. You still need to take care of them. You still need to find ways to encourage that teamwork and encourage that cooperation. And you're way more effective when you do it right.
Yeah, it's leadership is such a hard thing to teach because some people think from a management aspect. They're like, well, I'm just the boss. I got a title and whatever. But you have to win the hearts and minds of your people. I mean, you can't just get the title and people are like, well, we'll respect that guy, I guess. You've got to win their hearts and minds. You've got to touch souls and motivate people. And it's not just about barking orders at people, right?
Yeah, you have to inspire them. You want them to inspire them. And if they're inspired, they will work better and they'll work harder and they'll be more effective. And that's what leadership's about to me, is how do you inspire them to be greater than the sum of the parts, and how do you get the most out of your organization? And that's not sitting behind a computer answering emails or looking at spreadsheets. It's actually, in some cases, getting out there, talking to people, understanding the culture and how you can make it better and how you can help them achieve their goals.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how people will follow certain leaders and won't follow others, and what appeals to them and what makes a difference in connecting with people. And I some people talk about they call it the emotional quotient or emotional intelligence that leaders should have. What do you think about that phrase, emotional intelligence? Do leaders need to have an emotional intelligence?
I think you need emotional awareness. Maybe I think intelligence implies you have it or you don't. And some people have it. It's easier for them than others. I think you need emotional, awareness, meaning that you need to understand emotionally what is motivating the people that work for you, and how you get that awareness is different for everybody. Whether you're an extrovert or introvert, it doesn't matter. If your goal is awareness, then how do you get that? Is that doing a lot of one-on-ones with your employees or your directors? Or is it, are you more extroverted and you can get a group of folks together and kind of talk and pontificate and motivate them that way? But I think it comes down to really how do you communicate and how do you listen? And I think anyone that has, high emotional awareness, it's probably, or ultimately intelligence, is because they probably learn how to listen at a young age, and they just know to listen, to try to understand the situation from the person they're talking to, vice just trying to, put my direction on you or make sure you understand my goals. I want to know your goals. I want to know what that person's motivated by, and that's different for everybody.
Yeah. That's really important because, it's that difference between being a manager where you're more concerned about your goals and a leader, Let me ask you this. I had somebody argue with me one time. I've been a CEO of my company since I was 18. I hope I understand something about leadership. But I had a manager argue with me once about leading from the front. Does a leader lead from the front, or does a leader lead from behind?
Well, in the military, they like to say you lead from the front, but clearly if you're a senior leader, you're not on the front line, as it were, because you're trying to be in the position where you can make the best decision. And I think you need to show that anything you're asking them to do, that you understand that risk, and you've either done it before or you can. But arguably, if you're a leader needed to make big strategic decisions or even tactical decisions, look at the military scenario. If you're there with a gun in hand at the front line, you're not probably paying attention to all the other information out there to make the right decisions on where you want the organization to go. So, some of the great corporate leaders, they're not necessarily on the assembly line turning wrenches. They might go do it occasionally, but you have to be in the right position to, again, come down to have that emotional awareness. And that doesn't mean you have to be the person in the front. However, I think when you see, there's a good balance there, and the idea that leaders eat last is important. I don't like to, especially on a ship where you have a lot of, in the Navy with a lot of tradition, it's easy to have stovepipe areas where you're going to eat and different foods and stuff. And I saw, particularly from the Marines, and General Mattis was a good example of this, is, that he'd walk into a chow hall and they'd want to make him a beeline for the front of the line and get his food and sit down. And he and many others have always said, no, I'm gonna wait till I make sure that my crew, the people I'm entrusted to take care of, eat first. So that's kind of the difference, I think, is, be willing to do whatever you ask your people to do. I think that's important. But I also think as a leader, you probably make some cases your best decisions if you're stepping back and looking at the big picture.
There you go. It's people first, man. That's what you're saying. I mean, and people see that in you as a leader. I mean, the one thing I talked about in my book, Beacons of Leadership, is you send forth that beacon from a lighthouse as a leader that communicates, your ethics, your values, and if you're making PR. PR issues of, hey, the company's morals are this, and you're operating against those morals in the opposite way. Yeah. Like, hey, we're a trusted organization. Meanwhile, I'm ripping money off out of the company. People see that and they go, hey, this guy's, as George Carlin used to say, he's full of shit. So I love how that sort of mantra's in there. And so a lot of people are going to learn about leadership and running organizations, I think, from your book. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I hope it, I hope there's folks in the military that like it just because they have some good sea stories they might be part of. But I try to write, again, to a broad audience in a way that, whether you ever spend a day in the military or not, the lessons, the things I were taught along the way, and what I think is a great learning environment for leadership in the military, that they'll take that with them in the corporate world or the nonprofit world or just their day-to-day, world. Because I think there's lessons in there. Not, it's leadership, it's life. It's, I'm not teaching how to surf in the book. So if you're picking it up, I think you're going to learn to surf. But I'll tell you, it's, I think find whatever it is for you is surfing, right? That's
in book 2, evidently. How to surf.
If I do well, that's great. I'm going to partner with Kelly Slater.
there you go. How to surf. I mean, hey, I wish I'd learned to surf. I'm not sure I can learn to surf now at my old age and my bad knees and so maybe I need to lose a little bit more weight, but I'm definitely shark material. So they're gonna see me and they're gonna be like, well, let's go for that. So when you're skinny like you guys, they're gonna be like, that's just all bones, we're not gonna mess with that. But me, they would definitely be like, hey, it's lunchtime. We've had lots of military folks on the show, and we've talked about PTSD and high suicide for military officers, especially veterans. It's shocking to me how we have people that we've trained in leadership, and they're running billion-dollar planes and stuff. We've sent them to run billion-dollar planes, but they position out of the military, and they struggle to find jobs or works. Homeless veterans, etc., and suicide veterans as well. What can we do better as American people to support the military better, understand them more, and try and support veterans better?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's what I do now in the nonprofit world as I run Veterans Village of San Diego. We focus on homeless veterans and veterans that have struggled transitioning, whether it's mental health or drug abuse or just employment stuff. And we serve about 3,000 veterans and their families every year. But it's beyond just the veterans that I'm talking about that I see every day. It applies to anybody really transitioning from the military. You're coming from a way of life. It's not just a job. And I even see that, in my nonprofit work, where things I take for granted or things I say from my military time where I would never think twice about it, I say it now, and they're, like the example would be PT. told someone the other day, I'm going to go PT. And they're like, what does that mean? Physical therapy? I'm like, no, I'm going to go do physical training. They're like, oh, I've never heard that before. And in my mind, I'm like, well, there's a good reminder that, not everybody speaks the same language. So I think if you're an employer, I think if you get a veteran, you get somebody with a military background, you're going to get somebody that works extremely hard, very focused on the mission, and still learning what that means. But that will overcome any other stuff he or she might be going through. I think it's worth it. Even if they don't speak the language. Even if, I ran a $10 billion aircraft carrier, but it doesn't mean that I run a $10 billion corporate budget. Those are different things, and you do them different ways. But there's a lot of good skills that you bring from the military, and I think the civilian side should to do what they can to help them out. And one, because I think it's beneficial to your company. I think any veteran you hire will be value added in many ways, in ways you probably don't even anticipate. But then for the veterans that struggle, or the veterans that, get into drugs, or they suffer from serious mental health problems, we do want to help them. And I think that's where the nonprofit world and the VA and different aspects of the government can come in to help. And I would encourage anybody to get involved in that, volunteer, whether it's once a week, once a month. I actually try to volunteer throughout my entire career, like it with Habitat for Humanity or different things based on where I lived. And now I do it full time, but I think everybody would learn from it. And you could take the homeless situation as an example. We all see it, depending where you live. It's greater than other places, and it's a complex problem, and it's easy to discount it and just kind of write it off as the city's problem or the county's problem. But everyone can make a difference. And I think that regardless if you have any experience with veterans, if whether it's a veteran homeless or a non-veteran homeless program or any nonprofit, I think there's a lot to be gained from it. And you get to learn about folks that sign up to serve their country and just somehow tripped and stumbled as they came out or years after they left the military. And I think we owe it to them to try to help them out and get back on their feet.
Yeah. My friends that have cycled in and out of tours of duty, they've struggled with, the loss of the band of brothers, the loss of, hey, Chris, when I'm in Iraq, I got people on my back, they have my back. I'm alone here. And nobody's going to cover me. Nobody's going to back me up. When I'm there, I'm in the action, I'm in the juice, but I also have that band of brothers. Well, what if there was like a military social media network that would help, just from the military and ex-military, probably won't, not for current military, because, maybe somebody shares some secret, I don't know, some weird stuff and go on. Somebody say something and get in trouble. But maybe for ex-veterans to have that virtual band of brothers. I don't know. There's an idea.
Yeah, there are. I mean, that's what's great about, the internet, and there's a lot of communities out there that can be part of. There's a lot of great organizations that are national, like whether it's Hiring Our Heroes or even, the VA itself is a network that takes care of veterans that might be in need. But I think that's the one thing you do, to your point about Band of Brothers. You come from this organization that faces high risk operations, life or death operations. It develops a lot of trust, to the point, what you said is, someone's got your back. It's life or death. So you're looking for that same kind of sense of teamwork and camaraderie, and you're probably not going to ever find it like you did when you're in the military, because you're ideally not doing life or death stuff. Now, if you go first responder, maybe you'll find that in the police force or fire department or something like that. But in general, if you go to a corporate world or business world, you're probably not going to ever get that same sense of trust, and that's sometimes disheartening and sometimes makes people uncomfortable because they just don't know where they fit in because of that. I think they figure out over time. They also, tend to then ideally have a strong family or network, to your point, that they can leverage and reach out to help fill that void.
There you go. More support for our veterans. We live in a time that's kind of interesting, where we've had peacetime for a long time, up until the Iraq War with Russia. And it seems like a lot of Americans kind of started taking the military for granted and veterans for granted, and not even like realizing the sacrifice that people make. I mean, you're putting your life on your line. It's not like you guys are out there just eating donuts and Doritos, hanging out and shaking saber out at people. It's a big deal to cut that line in the sand and let everybody know that, we can go at a moment's notice if everyone doesn't keep in line and mind their manners.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to like the fatigue as a nation that we have after now decades of conflict. I think, I go back to 9/11 and 2001 and the sense of pride and camaraderie we felt at all levels of the government and certainly across the country. And it was an interesting time. But then you fast forward 20 years later, I think people have got fatigued. I don't think people discount veterans, or, I think there's a lot of great programs that didn't exist 20 years ago. I think there's a lot more effort put into trying to place veterans in the right kind of company. So I think that we've done a good job of continuing to take care of veterans and active duty, for that matter, as a country, and fund them appropriately. But I think we've gotten fatigued with maybe our foreign policy is where we kind of try to draw that delineation. Well, I think we're all tired of being at war. I mean, you join the military, you know, you might have to fight, but you don't necessarily want to do that every day. You're not, you know, you actually like the idea of being strong, but not having to use it and kill people. But 20 years of foreign policy that's kept us in a place that we thought we were only going to be for months. People are fatigued. The nation's fatigued, both financially, politically, you know, emotionally. And so my hope is that people continue to support the veterans and the active duty military and those that sign up to serve. But then take their frustration towards foreign policy, which is really where I think people get concerned, and then take that to the ballot box. And that's your way to influence that. And so far, I think we've done a good job of delineating the two, but over time you get worried this will not. And military becomes more of a stovepipe caste system where people serve because their parents served and not beyond that. And that's not where we want to be either, I think, as a nation.
Definitely. We need to definitely respect the sacrifice that people make. And I think we just had Memorial Day. Let me ask you this. We had Don Bentley on the show. He's one of the writers for the Tom Clancy series. And I believe he talked about how, you know, the Navy of China is bigger than ours. Where you mentioned the South China Sea issues earlier. And I think he said to me a statistic that kind of blew my mind. He said that their Navy is growing at the rate of the Australian Navy like every year or something, which is kind of weird if you know everything that's going on in that theater. What are your thoughts on that? As a Navy, are we going to be able to compete with them? Do we need to elect more leaders to throw more money at that? Or do you have any thoughts on that you want to bring up?
No, it's a complex problem. I think I'm a big believer in peace through strength, meaning that the stronger our military is, the less likely we will actually have conflict, because we'll make the outcomes of those decisions so untenable by our adversaries that they won't even want to consider it. The challenge becomes then, can we keep up with the Chinese Navy specifically? They're building fast. They're learning fast. I think we still have decades of experience ahead of them in terms of how you operate, how you fight. You know, we had Chinese nationals on a ship many years ago here in San Diego, and they were fascinated by not just the technology and the stuff we would show them, which is all, you know, unclassified stuff, obviously, but they're also very fascinated how we operated and how we, you know, launched airplanes. And I think they dawned on them that they were still decades behind. They could build those ships. They could build similar ships, probably not the same quality, but it's the training piece that they find themselves behind. So as a nation, we have to be cognizant of what it takes to counter not just the actual conflict that might or might not come, but how do we deter it from ever happening? And that's the conundrum, because we are limited. We have resource limited in terms of funding and what we can spend, and how much do we want to spend on it? And is that the right tactic? Is it a zero-sum game that you're only going to have one winner in the South China Sea? And if that's the approach, that there's a zero-sum game, that you have one winner, one loser, that's kind of the path we're on, and we have to then prepare appropriately. I'd like to think at the diplomatic level, we all win. We figure out a way to negotiate. We figure out a way to operate in the area together. And that's obviously hard, because now you have personalized people changing administrations, and that's a much more complex thing. So all the military can do is not worry about the politics of it, just be as prepared as possible and ask for what they need, which they do a pretty good job of doing that. But with an eye towards the Chinese growth, to your point, which at some point is, is strength in numbers, as they say, and they're approaching those points here pretty soon.
There you go. You know, they say that one of the reasons the USSR finally folded, the old Soviet government folded, is when they watched us in Iraq and they went, holy shit, these guys got cameras on bombs and shit. Like, they're like, why are we trying to keep up with these guys? And, one of the few good things you can say about the Ukraine war, it's a horrific thing that's killing civilians, is that it really exposed how bad their leadership is and their bad military. And hopefully China has taken a second look at that. I think they have, and gone, maybe, like what we speak about here today and in your book, the leadership and the way the U.S. government runs its military and trains and stuff over, these last 250 odd years. There really is something about it that's just more than the hardware of, well, we got a ship.
Yeah, I think any successful organization, whether it's military, corporate, or nonprofit, it takes good leadership, and that sometimes makes the biggest difference. Leaders focused on the people as much as they are the product or the ship, as it were. I think that's where our adversaries are paying attention too, but they come from systems where it tends to be more hierarchical and decisions have to be made at the highest level. And that slows down, no matter how many ships you have or airplanes you have, it tends to slow down your ability to fight. And we're seeing that play out now in Ukraine, I think, with the Russians. And I think that the question then should be, what does the South China Sea look like? How do they fight and where do they compare? And how do we make sure we're making decisions quicker and more effectively, and therefore taking advantage of any kind of numerical insecurity we have if their numbers are greater.
There you go. Well, I'm glad I got the U.S. military on my side because I don't think I want to fight anybody else. I grew up shaking under the desk, to protect me from nuclear war because that works. Right. Those steel desks. I grew up with the USSR, and so to watch the Russian military do its thing, I'm just like, seriously? I was scared of you in fourth grade. But there you go. My last question to you is: do you have a favorite book on leadership? Is there a number one favorite or something you go back to for leadership to read?
So I do,
other than your own book.
Right. Yeah. I like McCraven's books. I think it's simple and they're easy to read and easy to relate and easy. I can tell those stories on to my kids or my sons and stuff in a way that's applicable. I do like some of the philosophy books with Marcus Aurelius, and I love Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic because sometimes when you have a moment, you can pick it up and read one page, and so I think I don't know that I have a favorite. I like to diversify, I guess, my reading, as they say, and my to be read pile is certainly much bigger than my, or grows much quicker than I can keep up with it. But I think I found a lot from reading some of the philosophers we've discussed today, because I think there's amazing relevance today, many years later, and they're still applicable. And I find that fascinating.
It's fascinating too, because you read it and you're like, was he around, right? Does he know what's going on right now? And you're like, wait, this is like Roman times? Like, oh, there you go. Well, it's been an honor, sir, to have you on, and thank you for your service and everything that went on. I think it was just a beautiful viral moment to see your crew, give you a standing ovation and cheer you as you left the ship. And just the outpouring of love is a testament, I think, to your leadership, to how you're regarded by your people. And certainly when I walked around my business ships, no one gets up and claps. In fact, they usually throw eggs and tomatoes and stuff. So I think it's just a testament to the quality of character that you have. And hopefully people will pick that up in the book, learn from it, and become better leaders.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I enjoyed the chat today. And it was certainly a fun book to write, and I hope people enjoy it.
There you go. Give us your .com so people can find you on the internet.
Yeah,
sir.
It's surfwhenyoucan.com, and then the book, you can order it now on Amazon or Borders or any major retailer as well. And the book comes out June 13th.
There you go. Order it up, folks, wherever fine books are sold. Surf When You Can. Lessons in life, loyalty, and leadership from a Maverick Navy captain, available June 13th, 2023. Thanks to everyone for coming by the show. We certainly appreciate you. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, and TikTok. For the love of God, we're trying to be cool over there. It's not working.
No.
They just look at us and go, you guys are kind of old and uncool.
Yeah.
And then we're just like, no, we're cool. But they're not buying it. Anyway, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.